Awesome. So hello, this is week 2, and this is a series of 10 workshops we'll be doing to help you prepare for the science fair. Today we'll be focusing on background research and the literature review. And we are the Science National Honor Societies at Miami Coral Park. My name is Alejandra Perry, so let's get started. So what is our timeline? So last week, September 25th, we had our intro to research and identifying a problem statement workshop. This week, we're going to have our background research and literature review. So I really appreciate that you're here today, despite there being no school. And that's really awesome. So pat on the back for you. And then next week, we're going to focus on research design and methodology, and we'll just go down this whole sequence. If you haven't already, this is our QR code for the Google Classroom, and that is where you'll have access to all of our workshop recordings in case you're not able to make it to any of our workshops. Let me move on. Okay, so what exactly did we talk about last week? So we talked about coming up with ideas and making problem statements. So in case you weren't able to make it, how do you come up with an idea? How do you even start? What is science fair? So you need to think of an idea of something you're interested in. And one way of doing that is by getting a list, just a regular sheet of paper, and jotting down different terms you're interested in. For example, I really like cats. So on my list, I would write cats. I would write animals. Or if I really like the earth, I would make a list about geography or different kinds of plants. Do you understand what I mean? So you make a list. And then from that list, you see what you're most interested in and how you can write questions about that. So let's say we go on with the cats idea. Now I want to ask, okay, well, why does my cat act this way after getting food? Like, let's say I give my cat something sugary. Why does it behave a certain way? Or let's say it hasn't eaten in a while. Why is it behaving that way? I start asking different kinds of questions. And then once I've identified questions that I'm interested in, then I start thinking about the variables. So going back to the idea about the cat and what it eats, one variable can be, okay, the amount of food it receives, and the dependent variable, the behavior, and I measure that behavior in a certain way. So when we're talking about variables, they have to be things that are quantifiable. So the amount, that's something that's measured. I can measure that in volume. I can measure that in mass. Its behavior, I can measure that as the number of times it does something, or the distance it runs, or the velocity. You understand? So different things that are measured, those are all variables. And there has to be a clear relationship between the independent variable, which is what you're modifying, and a dependent variable, the thing that you're seeing the change of. So I hope that makes sense. I know this is a little bit of a summary. If you have any questions, like right now, do you want to ask any questions, anybody? Does this make sense so far? No, everybody's muted. Remember, you can just unmute yourself if you have any questions in between. Okay, so that's what generating ideas. So how do we make a good problem statement? So let's say my question so far, what is the effect of giving my cats this amount of sugar versus this amount of sugar? So I'm comparing two amounts of sugar on the number of times it scratches its head, whatever. Let's say that's my problem statement.
Wait, excuse me. Can we change our problem statement if it doesn't have any variables? Because mine is
Yes.
a little bit underdeveloped.
Yeah, I was looking at everybody so far. I haven't made any comments so far, but yeah, I wanted to make some suggestions that it's really important you have clear variables, because
Okay,
you're asking
so
something oh yeah, go ahead.
oh no, never mind, never mind. I
Okay,
got it, I got it.
you got it? Okay, great. So yeah, first step of making a good problem statement, it should stem from your interest. So if it's not something you're interested in, it's going to be really hard to make a project that's actually good, because you're just not going to enjoy it. And if you don't enjoy it, it's going to show in what you produce. And then you have to make sure you have an independent variable and the dependent variable, and you know what those are. Those are things that are measurable and the relationship is clear. It should be testable with an experiment or an evaluation that produces numbers. So maybe counting something, measuring something, anything that has numbers, because if it's just qualitative or just things that you see but cannot measure, it's going to be really difficult to make a concrete conclusion. And the last thing, it should relate to a real world issue or a situation that happens in real life. It should present some kind of solution, or it should benefit the world in some way. So let's think, I have these two examples. So let's say I'm someone who uses a lot of social media and I want to learn about social media. So I'm thinking, does watching over 10 hours of TikTok each day make me do worse in school? Let's say that's my question. Well, that's pretty good, but we need to be a little more specific, because what do you mean by this amount of hours, and what do you mean by doing this well, or how your brain works? You understand what I mean? It's kind of not clear. So here's a better example. What is the effect of the time spent on TikTok on the academic performance of teenagers ages 13 through 18? That is pretty good. Why? Because look, you have your independent right here, the thing that you're modifying, the effect of time. That is literally your independent variable. So it's something that's measurable, it's something that you can identify, and it's something that you can change. That's beautiful. And then spend on TikTok on academic performance. That's also beautiful, because there are a number of ways you can measure academic performance. You can measure it by evaluating test scores. You can measure it by measuring attention span. There are a lot of assessments you can do that produce numbers in order to know the effects. So that is a pretty good problem statement. And then the last part, which is not necessary, but it also strengthens it, your demographic. The fact that you know you're testing it on teenagers ages 13 through 18, that makes it even better, because you know, okay, I'm testing time, I'm testing academic performance, and it's gonna be for teenagers or humans on this specific range. So the fact that you have identified that as well, that also strengthens your problem statement. Of course, that's not really necessary at this stage so far. So the last thing we talked about were ethical considerations. So your question and the procedures you make to answer your question should not harm anybody, because if you're harming people, that's really defeating the whole purpose of benefiting the world. Of course, there are experiments that you might use worms, or you might use a microorganism or rats. That's perfectly feasible, but you have to make sure it's not causing unnecessary harm, and that you're doing everything in an ethical way that's already been outlined the previous research, if that makes sense. So if you're planning to use humans in your study, you need to make sure you have their consent, or if they're a minor, you have their parents' consent. And if you're planning to use animals, usually if they're invertebrates, that's not that big of a deal. But if you're using vertebrates like mice, you should speak with our science department and with our Science National Honor Society academic committee, just to make sure the way you develop that is completely ethical and reduces harm. So do you have any questions so far? No questions? Okay, so I'm gonna move on. So that's what we did last week. And then another thing that's pretty useful, these websites that you can use for project ideas. So there's science buddies this is like a database for different kinds of projects that you can filter through them. You can find high school projects, you can find early college level projects, and they give you a lot of different examples with their materials and the procedures, and you can get ideas on how you want to develop your projects in your problem statements. This one is for the International Science Fair. So this is a really big competition where high school students do a lot of college level projects. So in case you're interested in some more advanced projects and get inspiration from there, you can also use this database and find examples of different kinds of projects. Then let me move on. Okay, so last thing regarding problem statements. So make sure you submit your problem statements to our Google Classroom. So why? Because you can get feedback on your problem statements on how you can improve it, suggestions on how you can continue developing it with research and with your procedures, etc. That's really important. And then two, let's say you don't really want advice from us. You know what you're doing. Well, you still have to submit it. Why? Because you need approval from our science department. Because with any institution, there's an RRB, or an institutional review board. And basically that means that there's somebody who has to approve it. And in this case, that somebody is our science department and our science department chair. So that has to be reviewed to make sure it's ethical, it's feasible, and it's going with all of our school guidelines and everything like that. So regardless if you want feedback from us or not, you have to submit it to the Google Classroom so we can get you that approval. And the last benefit of submitting to Google Classroom is the fact that you get to keep track of everything, because the whole point of submitting these activities is to keep record of your work and have a good progress in order to develop your research paper and your project board. So if you haven't already, join our Google Classroom, and sometime this week, please submit your problem statements. Your problem statements were already due on Monday, and your background research, at least part of it, will be due next week on Monday. Okay, so any questions in that area? No questions? Okay. And remember, just like Scarlett, you're able to just unmute and ask questions, okay? That's not an issue. So now we're going to move on to our actual learning and our workshop, right? So we're following the scientific method. So we already finished this phase. We got an idea and we asked the question. Now we are here. We are doing our background research. And then based on our background research, we'll construct a hypothesis. But how do we get started with that? Well, what is a literature review? So when we're doing our background research, we need to organize it in a way that makes sense. So we're going to conduct a literature review. So would anybody like to volunteer and read what a literature review is?
A literature review is a survey of scholarly sources on a specific topic. It provides an overview of current knowledge, allowing you to identify relevant theories, methods, and gaps in the existing research that you could later apply to your paper, thesis, or dissertation topic. There are 5 key steps to writing a literature review. 1. Search for relevant literature. 2. Evaluate sources. 3. Identify themes, debates, and gaps. 4. Outline the structure. 5. Write your literature review. A good literature review doesn't just summarize sources. It analyzes, synthesizes, and critically evaluates to give a clear picture of the state of knowledge on the subject.
Exactly. So thank you, Scarlett, by the way. So what is all this mumbo jumbo that this website Scribr is saying? So a literature review, you're basically doing your background research, but it's just not this boom, 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 all this random pieces of information. Like you're saying, you're synthesizing, you're putting all this information together to understand, okay, what have people already done regarding my topic? You understand? But how do we get to that point that we start understanding how is our research field already developed? So we're going to do just background research at first. So how do we get started with background research? So the most important part of background research is just organization. So the first part of organization is to get a notebook or a document that you can use to record everything you learn regarding your project. Because here's the first thing. When you are presenting to your science or project, either at the school or the regional level or the state level, whatever, it is extremely beneficial to have a notebook that you record absolutely everything regarding your project. Because one, that validates the fact that you did your project yourself. Someone who copied somebody else's projects most likely would not be able to generate a whole notebook with all of their notes and all of their ideas and all of their progression through learning things if they didn't do it themselves. If that makes sense.
So when you try to find sources for your research, how do you know it's like credible?
Okay, that is a great question. We're going to go over that. But just to answer it, you know it's credible usually if it's peer reviewed. So most textbooks and most research papers, at some point, they're going to say that this was peer reviewed, which basically means other scientists in that field looked at it and said, okay, this is valid, this is real. If it's not peer reviewed and it's something that's just self-published, it can be true, but a lot of times it's not really reliable. So you can use it for maybe the earliest steps of learning something, but when you're really beginning to cite your sources and using that as real information for your literature review, you need to make sure it's peer reviewed. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay, great. And then another
But we
thing.
don't reviewed stuff.
Oh, what? What happened? I couldn't hear you.
Oh, sorry. I was also wondering, where do I find these sources?
I'm going to go over that. Don't worry, we have a bunch of links.
Okay.
Now, before we continue, I wanted to point out, even though our meetings, like our workshop from 2:30 to 3:30, Zoom only gives me about 30 minutes for free with their free plan. So in about 8 minutes, this Zoom meeting is automatically going to end, but using the same link that you used to get into this meeting, just reuse that again, okay? So like a couple of seconds before it ends, I'm going to tell you, okay, the Zoom meeting's ending, and just join back in and we're going to continue. Does that make sense to everybody? Can you give me a thumbs up with little Zoom meeting controls? Just so I know you're okay, I see a thumbs up from Scarlett. I see a thumbs up from Reed. Okay, almost everybody has a thumbs up. Okay, I see the majority of people with thumbs up. So you know, when this meeting ends, all of a sudden, just go back in and we'll be fine. So yeah, that's the first thing. Get a notebook and document absolutely everything. The second thing, make sure you have some kind of Word document or an Excel file, preferably an Excel file that has everything you've researched. Like I'm going to show you this example on the side, right? Let's say I'm researching about forest fires. So the first thing I want to research is how do forest fires start? So I'm going to keep track of the title of the resource, the author of the resource, when it was published, their link, and when it was accessed. That's super important because when you do your bibliography and you do your works cited, they're going to ask, when did you access the source? Because with a lot of online sources, things are constantly being updated. So you need to address when you've accessed it. So those are different pieces of information you need to keep track of. Let's say you're using an Excel file. This is a lot more organized. You can just put your link, you can put your title, you can put the description, and then the day you accessed it. And that's a really useful way of keeping organized. Do you have any questions so far? No? Okay. So what we're gonna do now is a quick lesson on how to use Excel or Google Sheets based on what you prefer. So I'm gonna start with Excel. So I'm gonna open my Excel file here. So this is something you can download. You can use it online as well. It's free with your Microsoft account from school. You can click on Excel and then you open a workbook. And then using these little squares, they're called cells, you're able to modify them. So let's say I want to start doing my research and I'm going to organize it this way. I'm going to do my title of that particular resource. I'm going to say the author of that resource. I'm going to put the link. I'm going to put date accessed. I'm going to put, I already put the link, so comments. I'm going to expand these. So to expand, you're able to just click, like you see how it says A, right? These are the names of the columns. You're just able to hover on the side and expand it. And that way you start forming your table with all your information. And this doesn't necessarily have to be something pretty. This is just for yourself so you can keep track. Okay. So let me see. So title, author. Okay. So yeah, that is your little information. So we're going to use this later on when we start filling it in based on a practice activity. That's what you do on Excel, and make sure you click Control S to save. You can save this to your OneDrive here, or you can save to your documents. I'm going to save to my computer. I'm going to do this, name it background. So another thing, let's say your background research is going to be really extensive and you don't want to mix everything all at once. So let's say I'm doing the forest fires. I'm going to say cause of forest fires. And then I'm going to do another one where it says effect. Oops. Effect of forest fires. You can see these little tabs at the bottom. Now I can switch between the different kinds of sources I find. And what I did just now, I hovered over these little pieces of information. I did Control C on my computer, on my keyboard, or I can just copy here. I go here, I click the first cell, I click paste these, and voila, it gives me my little sections. That's on Microsoft Excel. Let's say I want to use Google Sheets instead. So I can use Google Sheets. I search that up. Using your Gmails, you can make an account. I sign in. Let me find this one. Okay, so I'm on Google Sheets. I just make a blank spreadsheet. And then the same thing that I just did on Excel, it works the same exact way. I can just put my title, put my link, I can put my comments, and so on. And that helps you stay organized. So any questions regarding that? No questions so far? Okay, so let me continue here. Okay, so a little icebreaker. So let's actually do that right now together on Excel or with Google Sheets and just organize yourself. So would any volunteer be interested in sharing their screen and show how they're going to organize their background research based on what I just showed? Would anybody be interested in volunteering? Okay, I see Annabelle, you're raising your hand. Okay, so I'm going to give you the opportunity to share your screen. Let me see how to do that. That's it with our little icebreaker. Move on. Okay, so what is the first phase of actually doing this research, right? So what I like to call phase one is just getting familiar with the broadness of your topic, which involves lots of reading. So let's say I want to do a project. Okay, what is the effect of hydrogen chloride on tissue cells in the mitochondria? Wait, no, not mitochondria. In this multicellular organism, right? This really have this really complicated idea. You can't dive right in because then we're going to read the research papers. You're going to be, okay, what is PCR? What is this tissue? What are these cell membranes? You understand what I mean? So you actually have to know the science of your topic before you can start reading research papers about your project. Otherwise, it's going to cause a lot of unnecessary confusion, right? So I like to call this like prerequisites of your topic. So for example, let's say we're going back to our idea about what is the effect of the time spent on TikTok on academic performance of teenagers. You need to learn psychology first. You need to learn a little bit of statistics first before it can start actually making sense, the science behind it. So let's say for that idea, what I would do, I would get a general psychology textbook and I'm going to sort for the chapters and I'm see how do I find cognitive science? Or what is the cognitive science behind school performance for adolescents? Or let's say I'm going to get a behavioral psychology textbook and I'm going to read about how the reward systems in the brain work and what is the effect of that on brain activity and the behavior. You understand what I mean? So you need to start learning the science of psychology if you're going to be doing a psychology project like this one. Or let's do another example. This was one of the people's ideas. So what is the nutritional effect of various eggshells on plant growth when it's implemented into plant diets, right? So I'm doing a project about nutrition. I'm going to do a project about plants. I'm talking about plants growth and chemistry. So I actually need to learn chemistry and I need to learn biology for this project to make sense to me. So I would get a chemistry textbook and I'm going to read about the different chemical properties and the composition of plants, the composition of eggshells, the chemical composition of xylem, etc. Or I need to learn about the biology part of it, right? So I would get a biology textbook and I would read about cellular respiration. I will read about how fertilizers work in the cells, how do enzymes work. You understand what I mean? All of this science background. So here, where in the science universe do you find textbooks, right? Because like I see on the internet, some textbooks are really expensive. So there are a bunch of ways you can actually get textbooks for free. So one way is with the public library. So there's a Westchester branch, which is the library that's super close to our school. If you need the address, I can share that. And there's also the International Mall, for the internal branch library within the International Mall, which is more in the Doral area, which also gives you access to a lot of textbooks. You can also request from Cora Park, our science department. We have a lot of textbooks that are stored away. So, and there are unusually niche ones too. So if you're interested in marine biology, coincidentally, we have marine biology textbooks. Or if you need something a little more broad, we have the Campbell biology textbooks. We have different levels for physics and chemistry. We have high school level, we have college level textbooks. If you need any of those in order to start familiarizing yourself with the science. Another thing you can do is just find textbooks on the internet. Now, that's not necessarily stealing them because they have them for free with these different databases. Like there's this one called Open Textbook Library, there's OpenStax, there's LibreText, OER Commons, Pressbooks, and a bunch of others. Like when you access them and you search for particular key terms, you can find textbooks related exactly to what you're interested in. So I'm going to use, I believe the next one, yeah, finding textbooks activities. I'm going to go back. So anybody give me your problem statement, like and any problem statement that you have, so we can find textbooks for them. So you can start learning about the science. Anybody with a problem statement? Come on, there are a bunch of people here. Also,
What was the question?
oh, okay, sorry. Also, speaking of questions, like, does anybody have any questions so far? Oh, I see, somebody. They put their problem statement. Problem statement from George Rodriguez. Well, hydrogen, if managed properly, could be a clean source for developing countries. Current methods of production are expensive and inefficient for usage by the masses. This project will focus on um, testing whether different types of electrolytes can change the electric currents and the efficiency of water electrolysis. The purpose is to evaluate low cost and efficient electrolytes that could make hydrogen fuel production more accessible. Wow. So George, obviously I can tell you've already been doing a lot of research, but there's a lot of things that we can find, a lot of words that we can use to find textbooks related to your topic. So I'm gonna open textbook library. This one's a really good website. Okay, and then I'm gonna search the library to see what textbooks they have related to electrolytes, right? So let's say electrolytes. And you notice here, okay, they have some, but these are related to human nutrition. And I know yours is not human nutrition, it's more about chemistry, right? So maybe I can search up chemistry and electrolytes. Electrolytes. Okay, so now they're giving us textbooks more chemistry-based, introductory chemistry, the basics of general organic and biological chemistry, general chemistry. So a bunch of these textbooks. So what you can do, you can open one of these. Let's go, the basics of general organic and biological chemistry. I open this and I'm going to search through here different things that will make sense to learn about for my project. For example, here, let me see. Ionic bonding, ionic compounds, that makes sense to learn about. Energy, chemical processes, acids and bases, organic chemistry. Yeah, these are a lot of different things that might be interesting. So George, if you're able to unmute yourself, could you tell me from this table of contents, like one of these topics that you might be interested in reading about in order to understand the science behind what you're asking?
Could you scroll down a little bit more?
Yes.
Well, organic acids are good conductors of electricity.
Right.
So chapter 15.
Chapter 15. Okay, perfect. So let's say we want to look into chapter 15. That makes sense for your project. So I'm going to either open this as a PDF, which I can download, or I'm going to open it online. I'm going to open it online. And voila, they give me all the chapters. So I'm going to scroll down. I'm going to find chapter 15, organic acids and bases and their derivatives. And voila, they literally give you the whole textbook for free. So you can start learning about all of these chemical compounds and how that works. You understand what I mean, everybody? So you're learning about the scientific background. And this is going to really strengthen it because not only when you read research papers, you're going to interpret them correctly because you're going to know what they're talking about. But two, when judges ask you questions, you're actually able to explain it in a scientific way, not just reciting whatever you read because you don't necessarily understand the background. Okay, so this was awesome. Thank you, George, for sharing. Does anybody have any questions so far? No questions? Okay, thank you for the thumbs up, George. And remember, I'm going to post this on the Google Classroom, so you'll have access to all of these links. Okay, so we already did a little bit of an icebreaker. Okay, so phase 2, getting familiar with the key terms in your project. So this is kind of like in between. So I started, let's say, George started learning, actually, I'm not going to use you as an example. You're already pretty advanced. But let's say I'm a beginning student. I've read some chapters about cellular respiration, and I'm ready to move on to the next phase to start getting more specific into my question. So based on what I read, I would start looking for specific terms that are very specific to what I'm interested in. Like for example, let's say I'm doing a project about adhesives or different kinds of glue. So I'm probably going to read about the van der Waals forces, or I'm going to learn about covalent bonding, or maybe I encounter a specific chemical that would be really interesting to investigate called cyanoacrylate. So now I'm just going to do general Google searches about these and see what I find. Or let's say I'm doing a project about pastries or about the nutrition of sugar, whatever. I'm going to find these specific key terms as I read my textbooks about sucrose or additives or about caloric deficits. You understand what I mean? So at this point, I would start using Google to find general, or maybe even Wikipedia, to learn more about these particular terms, just so I'm more familiar with them. So let's say I'm gonna find, let's say in my textbook, let me go back to this one. Where did the link go? I think it went here. Because I saw that the one for that George, where the organic derivatives or something like that had a specific chemical and it would be really interesting. Oh my goodness, what happened to my tabs? Okay. Let's say organic derivatives. I want to learn about what that means. So now they're going to give you explanations. So what I would recommend you do is start generating a list of words that you keep seeing over and over again as you read and look up what they mean. Like what are derivatives and their uses in chemistry? So I would start reading about that to understand. And now you don't necessarily have to cite these websites that you use as your sources. I would recommend you save them, but they're not necessarily sources for your actual project. It's just so you can understand more about the science. Does that make sense to everybody? Is my explanation clear? Yes?
Are we going to be writing something with all these sources?
Writing, yes. So, well, for yourself, I would recommend as you learn things, take notes as though you were taking a class. Just take notes to learn about your particular field. But then what we'd actually be writing is a literature review, which is when we get to the actual research papers. So I'm going to go ahead and move forward. So we did phase one at the science, phase two, learning about those science terms. What's the next step? Let me go here. Okay, so what people like to call the real research papers. So there are a bunch of databases that you can use to find the actual research papers once you actually understand the science, right? So there is Google Scholar, that's a very useful one. There's PubMed, which is for biomedical and life science research. There's Education Resources and Information Center, which is useful for behavioral sciences. Open Access Journal, which is across disciplines, and so on and so forth. Different research databases that specialize in different research papers. So I'm going to go with a more general source, Google Scholar. I'm going to search that up. And then I'm going to just use this to find particular, well, this is kind of special, different from Google, because you can't just search up a big statement and expect an answer because it's going to confuse it. Instead, with your key terms that you identify from your science reading, you're going to search up more things. So let's say, George, if you don't mind, what's some of the key terms that you see repeatedly when you were doing your background research regarding your topic?
Electrolysis and electrodes.
Electrodes. Okay, so I'm going to search up maybe electrodes. Well, I think that's a little too broad in my opinion because you can search up how electrodes and electrolytes work, right? So let's say electrolytes. And I'm going to read in general how electrolytes work. So let's say I'm doing a general word. Well, electrolytes, chemistry. I want to go here. Okay, so now they're giving us more specific terms. We're learning about ionic solids. We're learning about auto-ionization, which are really useful things, microminerals. So you notice now we're getting more specific, like subfields of electrolytes, and that's where we want to reach, subfields. That way, when we go here, we're not getting really general things, because let's say I search up electrodes. It's kind of really general and all over the place, and we want to make sure it's specific to your particular problem statement. So what was your, can you tell me verbally, like what your problem statement was? I know you put it in the chat.
How the different electrolytes could affect the production rate of, hydrogen.
Hydrogen. Okay, perfect.
Yeah.
So you know what? I can use those key terms. Go over here and search up electrolytes, comma, hydrogen, comma,
Water.
and water, right? And see what up here. So it says the role of hydrogen evolution reaction in solid electrolyte interface, electrolyte behavior and hydrogen production and solar energy. That sounds like it's related to your problem statement, right? This one? Indeed, right? So I would copy that. And so when you're making your searches and you're using very specific terms and searching them up as these little terms rather than full statements, you're able to generate these lists of research papers and open a bunch of them in order to access them. So let me find a couple more for us to look at. Dynamical behavior of anion water, hydrogen bonds, and aqueous electrolyte solutions. That looks like it's useful. The effect of electrolytes on kinetics on hydrogen evolution reaction. That sounds like it's useful, right, George? If I'm interpreting your problem statement correctly?
Yes, they look like a good search for the research.
Right, so we're finding a lot of relevant sources. So let's see this one. Okay, so a lot of research papers, they cost a lot of money, just like textbooks do. But there are ways of working around that. So what we can do, who here does dual enrollment? Or who here doesn't do, well, I don't want to point any, okay, George, yeah, you do dual enrollment. So that means you have your Miami-Dade College email, right?
Yes, they give you access to the Miami-Dade
Exactly,
College library.
So what everybody has to do, even if you're not going to take any classes at Miami-Dade College, you need to register as a Miami-Dade College student so you can get the Miami-Dade College email. Do you know why? Because look, when I go here, they're not going to give me the full paper. It says access for your organization. If I don't have any organization, if I'm not a student at Miami-Dade College, I'm not a student at FIU, my resources are really limited, and that's very annoying. But we can go about that as being technically a Miami-Dade College student, even if we're not actually taking classes there. So I can access through Miami-Dade College. When I click that, I'm able to choose an account. I'm going to choose alejandra.perry001 at mymdc.net. That is my Miami-Dade College email. And then I'm just going to write out my password. Oops. I log in. I verify my identity because they have this two-step verification thing. Give me 1 second. Okay, so I'm going to enter this. Oh, okay. And then sometimes this happens. Sometimes research papers, they just don't let you access it because Miami-Dade College doesn't pay for that database. And that's okay because there are tons of resources you can look at. So unfortunately, you're not able to look at this because Miami-Dade College doesn't pay for this website. But let me see this one. Access is not provided for Miami-Dade College. Okay, that's not good. This one, let me see. Does Miami-Dade College subscribe to this one? Okay, well, it seems like this one doesn't require to log in, which is even better. So you can look at this one for free, and then they give you the whole research paper, and you can download that. Download PDF. Okay, and you can see the whole paper. So yeah, those are some considerations you need to make. One, whether the research paper is for free or you have to use an institution. So if it's free, you're good to go. If you need to use an institution, log in with your Miami-Dade College email. If it doesn't let you do it with Miami-Dade College email, that means Miami-Dade College doesn't pay for that website, but that's fine. Just look for other research papers. There are tons and tons of them, okay? Does anybody know how to find their Miami-Dade College emails? Or you need help creating an account with Miami-Dade College? No, nobody. Everybody has their emails from Miami-Dade College. Well, if you have any questions, remember you can ask me, and you can just stay at the end, and we can resolve that too. Okay. So let me go here. Okay. So that's basically it with the research papers. So now let's go back up to our literature review. So what are we going to do when we come up with the science behind it and we go with our research papers? We're going to document everything using our Excel files, right? All of the titles, the authors, the links, the dates that we access, and the comments we make. We're going to keep track of that because if we use something, we find information and we lose it, that's going to be very annoying. And then using that information and all of those information that we gather, now we can just record a summary. So that's what a literature review is. It's just a summary of all the research you find regarding your topic. So has anybody done things that you've already thought of? Then you write about that. Or are there some gaps in the current research? You write about that. Does that make sense? Just a summary of everything you find. Does that make sense, everybody? Thumbs up? Yes, in the chat? Okay, I see a thumbs up from George. See thumbs up from Annabelle? Okay, thumbs up from Aiden? Okay, incredible, I love that. So yeah, basically what you're doing. So phase 1, learning the science. Phase 2, learning the key terms. Phase 3, looking at the real research papers. And phase 4, writing your literature review. So what is next? What do we do up to next week? We have to submit our problem statement. So if you haven't already, which the majority of people who have not, you need to write out your problem statements. I really like the way George wrote his. So you can use George's as an example, the one in the chat, about explaining, okay, why is this important? What are your variables? What is your full question? That's beautiful. And then submit that to the Google Classroom. Once you have that ready, then you need to prepare your background research and or your literature review. So create your document. You don't have to share your document with all your resources. That's for you personally, but you do have to share your summary and that little paragraph that you make regarding your literature review and what you learned from the research papers. So if there are no questions, our workshop is officially over. Thank you so much for joining us on a non-school day. Really commendable of you. And I'm going to be here if you have any questions. So thank you. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you, Alejandra.
Of course.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you.